Let's get the views now of Nigel Farage. He was listening to that speech. And Nigel, what struck me was how George Galloway spoke of how he would be in the House of Commons. He referenced a conversation that I think you and I had about his oracy.
Yes, he did. And I mean, look, you saw him there. He's very, very good at message delivery. He's very charismatic. He's also very clever. You know, if Rochdale Town Football Club's on the verge of bankruptcy, George has pledged to save it. And you know what? He'll find the money, and he will. I mean, he just will do that. Yeah, I mean, he made it very clear, didn't he, that in parts of the West Midlands, by which he meant Spark Hill, in Tower Hamlets, he is aiming for a Muslim vote that Labour had taken for granted. Over 80% of the Muslim population had been voting for the Labour Party. Many of them, as I mentioned earlier, signed up cynically with the Labour Party on postal votes. And this now means that Galloway can challenge in 20 or 30 constituencies. I think it also means that the Workers' Party could put up a very strong candidate to take on Sadiq Khan to be Mayor of London, and that could really damage Sadiq Khan's position. So look, this is it. Sectarian politics is here to stay. People thought the result in 2012 in Bradford West was a complete one-off. It wasn't. It was a warning shot. This is voting along religious lines, allied to some extreme hard-left characters like the Chris Williamsons. No, this is real. This is here to stay. The Workers' Party are going to win seats at the next general election. I suspect not very many, but I do think this phenomenon, with all of its ugliness, all of its intimidation, all of its willfully breaking electoral law, with the police just standing by, daring not do anything, I think this is here to stay.
To hear George Galloway talk not just of this by-election, but about the local elections in some weeks' time. Clearly, a big group of supporters there cheering what he was saying, chanting his name. They'll be standing in those local elections. George Galloway wants to put a foothold there in Rochdale. He wants to expand his political network and win council seats. Do you think that's likely? Very. Oh, very likely. I mean, look, I mentioned to you earlier that there were boxes from some wards where the vote for Galloway was over 90%. So, yes, given that that population tends to be concentrated within certain wards rather than diffusely spread throughout Rochdale, and the same goes for Tower Hamlets, and the same goes for parts of the West Midlands. I would have thought in local elections, winning a lot of seats in Rochdale now becomes, well, I was going to say, comparatively easy. You are a man who stood for Parliament many times. You know how hard it is to break into the first-past-the-post system that we have in this country. As leader of UKIP, you managed to win 2 by-elections, but only when incumbents defected to you from the Conservative Party in Rochester and Stroud and in Clacton. Can George Galloway really replicate this success with the Workers' Party of Britain in a situation that's not a by-election where the Labour Party is effectively tapped out, in a situation that doesn't have the sort of crucible of attention as a by-election does, with perhaps the lower turnout that has helped him this evening?
Well, let's be clear. He won't win many seats in Devon or Suffolk or places like that. When people vote along religious sectarian lines, and when tensions have been inflamed over Gaza, then the answer is they will vote exactly the same way in a general election as they voted in this by-election. Because to them, the running of the United Kingdom, the cost of living crisis, the problems with our borders, they don't matter. This by-election was won purely on Middle Eastern politics, purely along religious lines. Tom, they are going to put up a very serious challenge in somewhere between 20 and 30 seats. And, don't underestimate what tonight means.
What do you think Keir Starmer will be making of this speech? He will no doubt have paid attention to it. The people around him will have noted every word of it. What will the Labour Party be thinking tonight?
Well, what Keir Starmer can't afford to do is to tack towards the Galloway position. That would be impossible. Starmer's success until now has been to detoxify the Labour Party, to get it away from the days of Jeremy Corbyn, where it was unelectable on a national scale. And, you know, in many ways, I've praised him for that. But you know, the idea that Starmer will turn his back on Israel being allowed to exist as a state, the idea that Starmer will denounce Netanyahu and his campaign in Gaza as being a genocide, this simply isn't going to happen. And the Labour Party, through wholly irresponsible immigration policies, remember, rubbing the noses of the right in diversity. And I remember debating with Mandelson on this, and he said, but surely all diversity is good. Well, this is diversity. Diversity without integration leads to separation and has now led to religious sectarianism. There is literally nothing the Labour Party can do about this. Now, it isn't going to hurt them much at this election. As I say, it's a maximum 20 to 30 seats in which they could get badly hurt. But the long-term implications of this are very serious. Remember, the Muslim population has risen by 44% in the last 10 years. It's projected to do the same in the next 10 years. You know, by 2029, you may well see the left of British politics even under first past the post. But because those voters are concentrated in tight geographical areas, you know, we are heading longer term for a big split on the left.
Nigel, isn't that the fault not of diversity, but the opposite of diversity? Of siloed societies, of hugely homogenous communities, living side by side, living parallel lives. That's not diversity, that's the very opposite of diversity. That's sectarian.
It's multiculturalism. The Labour Party encouraged multiculturalism, by which they meant embrace the culture from which you come from, celebrate that, don't become British, and for goodness sake, don't ever consider yourself to be English. And actually, you know, Trevor Phillips and many other people now have said that policy is what's led to those siloed communities. If this is what Labour meant by diversity, then it's a disaster. But it certainly is multiculturalism. And, you know, we can be a very happy multi-ethnic society. There's no difficulty with that whatsoever. In fact, we had been very good at it compared to many of our European neighbours. But the encouragement of separate communities, the fact we tolerate huge numbers of people who've lived here for years not speaking English by just changing road signs to different languages, this is all a part of that problem.
It's interesting because there are different versions of a multi-ethnic society. The American ideal was always the melting pot. Different people of different races living side by side, sharing in an idea of what it is to be an American, a shared culture, different aspects within it, of course, but a shared identity. I wonder, Nigel, do you think that perhaps we're delivering the opposite in some parts of the United Kingdom? Far from being a melting pot, we've become a divided society.
Well, very much so. And, you know, GB News have been covering heavily the last couple of days, you know, an upcoming play at which black people only are invited to attend. We're actually, in many ways, encouraging division. And this is a disaster. You know, probably the most successful human rights campaigner in terms of dealing with racial prejudice, you know, was Martin Luther King. You know, and he very clearly said, I want my 4 kids to be judged not by the colour of their skin, but by the content of their characters. And we're moving away from that. And identity politics is what separates us up into these separate silos. And it is very, very bad news. Now, I repeat the point that in many parts of this country, the multi-ethnic society has been a great success. But when people are separated out on the grounds of race or religion, and it's religion here that is the real issue, then I'm afraid I just don't see short-term how we mend this.
I think it's a very important distinction to raise, Nigel, that this is a distinction in belief in religion, not in race or provenance. But this is a really interesting night tonight. This is a fascinating night because of what it could mean going forwards. In your experience of, I don't know how many by-elections you've been involved with now, Nigel, are they predictive of what is to come?
The answer, sorry to answer this way, sometimes yes, sometimes no. Sometimes they mean nothing.
Oh, Nigel, you're sounding like a politician now.
And hang on. So the Lib Dems can win a by-election and then lose a seat at a general election. And over the last 30 years, I've seen that pattern repeat itself many, many times. This is different. And it's different, firstly, because George Galloway is a formidable figure. As we've mentioned already, he will build up a base of local councillors, and that makes a huge difference when it comes to the general election campaign. He will also, I predict, save Rochdale Town Football Club. He just will. You watch. I know he will. That's why he mentioned it in his speech. But it's predictive because it shows that if people vote on religious lines, and you saw the letters that he sent out, to the houses, dear Muslim voter. You saw what he said in his speech about Muslim voters all over the country. Many of them will put their feelings about Israel, their feelings about Gaza, their feelings about Jews, they will put those above the kind of issues that you and I will think about when we vote at the next general election. So yes, this is predictive and it's going to have a massive impact in up to 30 constituencies.
Nigel, you've said before how you campaigned alongside George Galloway in some events during the EU referendum. There's a rumour tonight that the leader of Reform UK, Richard Tice, at one point asked George Galloway to stand as a Reform Party candidate. Do you know anything about this?
No, I don't. It sounds unlikely. I said to you, I worked with George during the referendum. He's a very charismatic character. I fundamentally disagree with his beliefs. I hate the sectarianism that he promotes, but it's difficult not to somehow slightly admire him for his abilities. You can admire someone's abilities without agreeing what they stand for. So the idea that Richard approached George...
Nigel, I should clarify. I'm being told that George Galloway himself has said this.
All I can say is it's news to me. I mean, it really is news to me. Extraordinary. No. He should have said it. But no, news to me.
News to you. Well, thank you, Nigel, for talking with us through there.